On today's episode of Living Proof, our guest was an ABC reporter before being incarcerated for protecting a whistleblower. My goodness, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
What an amazing story. My mind is blown that you are imprisoned for protecting someone. Can you share with us a bit about how that led up to that moment?
Yeah, it was all a bit of a blur when it happened. In 1992, I was working as an investigative journalist with the ABC in South Australia, and I took a phone call, and it was a guy on the other end of the line who said, listen, you're interested in the poker machines, and by that stage I've been doing a lot of work about the poker machines. There was new legislation that was coming into play. The government was writing it, and he said, look, I've got some very interesting news for you about some money changing hands between the poker machine lobbyist and a government minister. I go, oh, tell me more, because as an investigative journalist, you always follow the money trail. Yeah. And he said, no, not until you give me an assurance that you're going to protect my identity. Yeah. So, well, for me, that wasn't a big issue, because I thought, oh, well, I'll just say yes and, get the information. That's all that matters. So I said, yeah, that's fine. Look, I'm happy to protect your identity in that respect. So we met in a little coffee shop, and he took me through the whole process. And I said, yeah, but can you prove this? And he goes, I can get you some banking records that show the money changing hands between the minister and this lobbyist. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that's going to be very interesting to obtain. So I remember going back to my headquarters, and I spoke to my chief of staff and the news editor at the time, and they said, well, look, great story, but just be careful. I said, no, I'll be fine. I was 30-ish type thing. I was young, brash.
Confident.
Confident. Nothing's going to touch me. Type thing. I had a nickname called Crusher. It's sort of like kick the door down, put two in the chest, and then ask my questions.
Oh, nice.
But in this situation, I was just, oh yeah, look, he's got this information. So to cut a long story short, we got the information, the banking records. And we thought we'd do the right thing. I took a colleague with me. We went to Parliament House that night. So this is now, we're talking sort of late 92. And I sat down with the government minister, and she had a team of lawyers sitting in her office at the time. I thought, oh, okay, this is going to be interesting. And it was pretty late at night, and my colleague and I set up in the radio, all the recorders and all the rest of it. And so I took her through, and I said, well, you're very heavily involved in this legislation. She goes, oh yeah. So at the end of it, I said, so how do you explain this? And I put the banking records in front of her. Well, her face just went white, and she was first time just at a loss for words. But the next thing she said, where did you get those? And I said, well, that just answer my question. How do you explain this money going into your bank account from the poker machine industry, and your partner being your de facto partner? And so by that stage, the lawyer jumped up, and he just said, end of interview, that's it. So we thought, well, we've done the right thing. We've asked the questions. Next morning, we put it on the morning news. We did it on the World Today. It featured on the 7:30 report. It went national.
Wow.
And by that stage, the next day, the minister was under fire in Parliament by the opposition at question time. And there was just all this heat, this yelling, and all the rest of it that's going on about corruption within the poker machine industry. And I had this feeling, I thought, oh, great story, but I'm just wondering what's going to happen now. And within the space of the next 24 hours, the whole mood changed, because it became not the minister involved in corruption, but where did he get the bank records from? And within another day or two, there was police at the doorstep of the ABC. A team of people were set up to investigate how I got the information.
Wow.
And then that led to, within a very short space of time, I was charged with criminal offences, 9 to be exact. And then the ABC came to me, or management came to me, and they said, look, there's a lot of pressure on us at the moment. You're now charged with criminal offences and having obtained those banking records. You have a choice. And I said, well, what's that? And they said, if you go quietly, we'll pay your legal expenses. If you don't, you're on your own. So I remember going home and sitting down with my wife afterwards, and I thought, this is not exactly how I envisaged this was going to play out. And she said, well, what are we going to do? We've got a house, we've got at that stage 4 kids, young kids.
Gosh.
How are we going to survive? And I said, look, I don't know. I said, I didn't see this part coming. And then more pressure came from the head office in Sydney, and eventually they just said, you have to go. So from that point, I was charged with criminal offences, out of a job, not sure what was going to happen, and the trial for my criminal offences wasn't going to happen for another 6 to 12 months. So I was kind of left in limbo for that period of time. And then eventually the trial came about. Yes, I did have legal representation. What was listed for 5 days was actually went for 5 weeks. And during the course of that trial in the district court, the prosecution and the judge on a number of occasions said, well, who gave you that information? And I said, oh, I remember thinking back, I gave this guy an undertaking, I'm not going to say his name. So I said, well, as a journalist, I'm not bound to, to answer that question, because if you do, and you give up your source, well, that's it, pretty much, in this line as an investigative
where's your
journalist.
integrity?
Yeah. So the jury went out, had about a couple of days, no, I think it was about a night or so, and then they came back again, and I was found innocent on the criminal charges, and I go, thank you, it's over.
Absolutely.
And I remember my wife and I walked out, and we were walking down the streets. It was dark at that stage, and I put my thumbs up. And the next day in the newspaper was me with my thumbs up, and I got a phone call from my lawyers, and they said, "Well, congratulations on winning the case." And I'm going, "Great." I said, "It's all over," and they said, "Oh no, you're back in court on Monday." I'm going, "But why?" They said, the prosecution decided they're now going to charge you with contempt for refusing to answer that question. So between the Friday night and the Monday, I had suddenly gone from a free man to back in court again. And I remember sitting with my lawyers, and I said, "Look, what's going to happen here?" And they said, "Oh, don't worry about it. Precedent is, I think Darren Hinch at that stage, he'd only done a couple of weeks on the Funny Farm. There is a few other journalists who had gone for contempt, and they got a slap on the wrist." And I was going, so I remember sitting down with my wife, and I was just, "Look, I think it's just going to be a slap on the wrist, maybe a little bit of community service, a fine, that sort of thing will be fine. I can get back into work again." Well, we turned up on the Monday, and by this stage, the prosecution were going at it hammer and tongs, and they had a short recess, went out the back there. I'm thinking, maybe this is not going so well. So I said to my wife during the break, I said, "I've got a bad feeling that this is not going the way that we thought it was going." And sure enough, when the judge came back, he said, "I'm going to give you another chance, Mr. Nichols, to reveal your source." And I said, "No, I'm not going to." I said, "It's not out of disrespect for the court or the process. It's just that I believe I'm going to honor my word to the source who gave me that information."
Absolutely.
And so he said, "Well, that's it, off to jail." And he said, "I'm going to sentence you, head sentence of 4 months. If you give up your source, you can come out." Well, the courtroom just fell apart. My wife fell apart. None of us were expecting that. We just thought, well, we weren't prepared. In fact, we were so unprepared for it that our eldest son had been picked up from friends at a school, and we thought we were going back to pick him up. And when when he turned on the TV and he saw Dad being led off into going off to prison, and he just said to the people who were looking after him, just saying, "Does that mean my dad's not coming home?" And they just said, "We don't know what the story is yet." So we hadn't really prepared as a family. We just did not see it was a crisis of monumental proportions that we just had not prepared ourselves for.
How horrific that your family had no idea. I would imagine that would be the hardest thing for a father and a husband.
And particularly with my wife as well, because she wasn't allowed to say goodbye to me, because at the courtroom, when they said they handed down the sentence, they took me away straight away. And the court sheriff, who had been with me in the previous criminal trial, she was in tears. And she just said, and I looked at her and I said, "Well, what are you crying for? I'm the one going to prison." She goes, "I have seen many powerful people walk away from this with far more serious crimes." And she said, "I just thought this is just ridiculous." And then at that stage, my wife just hid inside the courtroom because she was so devastated, thinking we just were not prepared for this. And at the end of the day, by the time she wandered out and ventured out from the front steps of the courtroom, she was cameras were being thrown, lights, microphones, and with the old question that journalists always ask, "How do you feel?" And of course, that was the last thing she needed at that point. Suddenly, the tables had turned. So I had gone from reporting the news and doing what they were doing to now being the subject of the news. And as they took me down into the dungeon, it was a case of, I don't know how I'm going to cope with this at this point in time.
Oh my goodness. How horrific. That just seems there's so much injustice there. Was there any time that you wanted to give up? Because obviously the judge had said, hey, I'll give you a chance. And I'm sure that there would have been a time where you go, screw this, I'll just give in.
Yeah, look, actually, my lawyers said the same thing. They just said, look, you can get out if you just give up the name of the source. And at that point, I'm thinking, what do I do? And I've spoken to a lot of people who have just said, we wouldn't have done that. You've got a wife, you've got 4 kids, the pressure that this is going to put on them as well was just horrendous. And as they took me off, and they did the belt and the shoelaces and the rest of it, and they shipped me back. They put me in the back of one of the trucks to take off to the prison. This was maximum security as well. I remember looking up through the skylight, and I saw the sign of the ABC coming through the skylight, and I thought, I cannot believe this. I'm the one who broke the story about corruption, and I'm the one on the way to prison. And so that first night, you asked that question, was there a time you gave up? Yeah, that first night when I sat there in the cell, it was cell 114 in the E division. I just thought, God, I don't know how I'm going to deal with this.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a faith, and I thought at that point in time, I just thought, where is God in all of this? I've done what I believe to be the right thing. My family has paid the price. We've stayed the course. And yet here I am about to, and I remember lying down in the cell on the bed, and I just jumped up because the pillow stunk of alcohol and the bed looked like it had blood stains all over it. And I remember looking out the bars, and I'm just thinking, I don't know if I can do this. I just thought, I'm not sure I can do this. And I remember hearing at that point, I said, God, I need something to get me through, the first night. I didn't know what had happened to my wife and the kids, and I thought, I just don't know how. I'm a clean skin. Been on the other side of the walls many times, reporting things happening inside, never in my wildest imagination thinking I'm sitting inside a maximum security prison for what I believe to be doing the right thing. And I heard this trolley coming down the whole corridor, and I thought, what's going on there? And I heard this lady yell out, come and get your drugs. I'm thinking, that's a rather strange thing to say in prison. Anyhow, our doors were all solid, and the little trap door opened up, and I remember peering out, and she was standing on the other side of the solid door. And as I looked out through that little trap door, I saw her lapel, and on her lapel it just had these 2 words, Jesus saves. And I looked at it, and I couldn't see her. I could just see the lapel and, and part of her body. And I thought, well, I asked for an answer, and I asked for some direction, and, couldn't ask better sign than that, So I knew from that point, even though I knew it was going to be difficult and I didn't know what to expect, I knew that my faith in God was going to get tested, as it did, but my faith is what carried me through.
Beaten charges of impersonation, false pretences and fraud. These charges arose from his investigation into possible bribery and conflict of interest involving a South Australian government minister, Barbara Weiss, and her de facto, Jim Stitt.
The police questioning took place behind closed doors, despite an ever-present and picture-hungry media. They were acting on information and a complaint made.
Reporter Chris Nichols is appealing a 4-month prison term for contempt of court. Yesterday, after being brought into the city from Yatala Labor Prison, Nichols was led from the Sir Samuel Way building, where no court was available,
and relatives of Chris Nichols. Just after 10 o'clock this morning, the former ABC journalist was free after doing time in South Australia's highest security prison.
How did you get through that time? Obviously your faith is really important, but I know that there's so many people watching that have either walked through a journey, are walking through one, or going to, where they've got to make a really difficult decision, and the difficult decision is the hard one. The easy one is the way out. So far out.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things that I've had to learn, because the decision was a difficult decision. Were there times did I want to give up? Sure. Every time my wife came in and the kids came in, it was like I wanted to walk out with them as well. The sense of injustice that came with the whole thing. The minister was eventually found guilty of 3 conflicts of interest, misleading Parliament, and was quietly put out to pasture. And here I am sitting in a prison and paying the price for standing up for what I believe to be the right thing. And so, yeah, there were times that my faith was tested to that point. But I really had to come to that realization that now I wasn't just talking about it, I had to experience it.
Yeah.
And so going through that process and watching it and developing every day, see, I could control the decision that I made, but I couldn't control the consequences and the decisions that other people made. Yes. And that was a difficult journey for me to learn. It took a long time for me to get around that process of understanding that bad things happen to good people, as well as good things happen to bad people, you know. So every moment of every day, we have to make decisions. We all make decisions, and sometimes, as you said, you know, it's easy to make the easy decision as opposed to the right decision.
Yeah.
I was now confronted with what I believe to be the right decision as opposed to the easy decision, and it came at a cost.
So just going back to the reason why you're incarcerated, am I right by saying that they were making an example of you?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, as an investigative journalist, you don't have too many friends in government or in politics. And so, this was payback. Before that, I had done a big story on police corruption. And then this occurred with the poker machines. And so it had upset the, the higher ups. And sure, there was a lot of evidence of people, this was payback time. And we'll make an example of journalists who refused to reveal their sources. It didn't bode well for the government at the end of the day. But yeah, it was a situation where, there was a lot of resentment for the fact that I had uncovered something that they didn't want uncovered.
So is there protection for whistleblowers though?
There is today. There wasn't then.
Okay.
So my case was instrumental in bringing about new legislation.
Wow.
And it still took another 25 years for that legislation to come in because politicians don't like giving away power or giving away rights to protect sources. We're not there yet, but it was a step in the right direction. And that part of that was also a way for me to realize that the pain that our family went through, my wife, our children, my decision, today I look back on it now and I see that today journalists have a higher degree of protection as a result of what happened. But we had to go through that process, that fire as it were, to get to this point. And we had to drag them kicking and screaming to get to that point. But there is a much better process now for whistleblowers. We now have whistleblower protection, both for journalists and for whistleblowers. It's still a little bit flaky, but it's better than what it was.
That's great. So looking back on the whole journey, what was the hardest thing?
Look, the hardest thing for me was the uncertainty of everything. Yeah. It was it took me 4 days before I had a chance to speak to my wife and children because no one explained to me that you have to book in for a phone call. So it was the unknown of what's going to happen to me inside. And you always have those fears of the Hollywood movies of the shower scene, and you sort of think, and there was so many stories we just haven't got time to deal with today. But it was just the uncertainty of everything, and I think that's where my faith was tested to the point of saying, I can't see what's going to happen tomorrow, but I know what I've got with me today.
Yeah.
And so the thing I suppose that I learned out of this lesson was that at some point all of us are going to go through a crisis of some sort. And it doesn't matter who we are or how well off we are or how poor we are. As humans, we live in a broken world. Yeah. We are going to go through a crisis. And there was a lot of lessons that I had to learn along that journey, not just when I was released after that period, but also how to deal with the sense of injustice and the frustration and the anger that came as a result of that as well. And that was a journey for me for many years to deal with as well.
Yeah, amazing. So when you're looking back, what is the biggest thing that you've learnt from that? Now you've had lots of life experience. Would you have done anything differently?
Definitely, I would have taken in a rope ladder and a metal file and probably a door lock or key or something that I could open myself. Look, people often ask me that, and I say yes, I would. But at the time, it was such a moving feast. Yeah. That we didn't have time as a family, and the decisions, we didn't have time to sit down and go, well, what should we do? What might we do? What could happen? Because we didn't know what was around the corner. So I suppose we, as a family, as a husband, as a wife, we made the best decision that we could at the time. Looking back on it now, look, there would be I think better ways of dealing with how I was removed from the ABC at a time when they should have been supporting me as well. But that's the value of hindsight, I suppose.
Yeah.
You know, part of making mistakes is that's part of wisdom.
Yes.
So looking back on it now, I think, if ever I was in that same position again, I would do things a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And that's the journey, that we go through in terms of wisdom.
Yeah, amazing. Chris, thank you so much for coming on Living Proof today and sharing your story and facing a crisis and overcoming. What an inspiration your story is.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Join us next time on Living Proof.